Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another week in your cozy corner of the internet, to your big sister reading corner. If you are looking for book recommendations and unhinged reviews, you have come to the right place. So before we kind of like jump into it, I always forget to do the thing that you're supposed to do apparently at the... Hello? Apparently you're supposed to talk about this at the beginning of the video, and I always forget, which is to say please like, please subscribe, follow me on TikTok, follow me on Instagram. We have brand consistency, so it's Laura Elise Studio on all things social media. I will say I do post a lot of the same content across TikTok. It just kind of gets refurbished, but you know what? Follow me in one, follow me in all, support the channel. It's a free way to support the channel. So I realized that I talk a lot about really depressing books on this channel, and that's not like on purpose. It just kind of happens. I feel like I just accidentally read a lot of depressing books. I do also think that's kind of like part and parcel with like literary fiction. I do think literary fiction as a genre tends to be a little bit more depressing because it does focus on like the growth of a character and like human nature as a baseline, and that can be, those topics can be heavy and those topics can be difficult to make light of. However, if you have been following my channel for a while now, you'll know that I'm embarking on this like 6-month experiment thing to like bring a little like happiness and sparkle back into my life. So I thought maybe it would be a good time to talk about some books that aren't depressing, particularly books to read in your like late 20s, early 30s, when you're feeling like a little bit lost and you're looking for a little bit of inspiration and direction. So everyone knows that your early 20s are like a period of discovery and of self-discovery and of, you know, finding your place in the world, etc, etc, etc. And yes, I would agree with that. However, I would argue that your late 20s, especially for me, was when I really started to become the person that I am today. And I think a lot of the books that I'm about to talk about feature characters who are in that age bracket, and sometimes it can be really nice to read about characters that are a similar age to you. Sometimes when you are in your like later 20s, constantly reading about characters who are 18, 21, it can feel a little bit, I guess, disconnected because you have gone through that period of your life already and there's not as much to relate to the characters in. So I'm going to be talking about 6 books that all feature characters that are either in their late 20s, early 30s, and are just kind of like a little bit more feel good. So let's get into it. So the first book I want to talk about is Really Good, actually, by Monica Heisey. So this is about our main character, Maggie, who is, I think she is in her mid-20s in this book. So we're starting off with exactly what I said I wasn't going to talk about. However, I think this book is great because it handles a 20-year-old who has been in a long-term relationship with the same person since she left high school, and that marriage has suddenly come to an end, and she's reeling with trying to work out how to move through the world as a single person for the first time in her young adult life. I love how a topic that can be so heavy and so upsetting and heartbreaking and devastating for a lot of people is handled with such a sense of levity and such a sense of lightness and funniness and gentleness. And I love how at no point does the author feel like Maggie is the butt of the joke. It feels like you as the reader are constantly in on the joke with her, and so you never feel guilty about laughing about Maggie trying to struggle to make her way through life. Basically, Maggie becomes single and also becomes a train wreck at the same time. She's really struggling to adjust, and she's not coping in, let's just say, the healthiest of ways, and really letting life get the better of her. What I particularly loved about this book, and the reason why it's on this list, is because, as I said, the situations that are quite heavy, which is the breakdown of a long-term relationship, are handled with a real biting sense of humor and a real tongue-in-cheek kind of wink-wink vibe from the author. You never feel like you're laughing at Maggie. You kind of always feel like you're in on the joke with her, and it does end on a bit of a lighter note. So Maggie definitely really struggles throughout the duration of this entire book. However, it does end with a bit of a sense of hope and a bit of a sense of her finding her feet and finding her place in the world and starting to move on to a new chapter of her life. I think this has a really wonderful beautiful sense of self-discovery, which I think is probably like one of the common themes amongst a lot of these books. And it kind of talks about in my opinion, one of the saddest reasons that people break up, which is not because someone cheats, not because people don't love each other anymore, simply because you drift apart, because you go through that period in your early 20s where you are discovering who you are as a person, and you get to the end of that period with the person that you started it with and realize that you are no longer people that work together. And in my opinion, that is really truly one of the saddest reasons to end a relationship, because it's not some big dramatic screaming scorned woman thing. It's just life. So yes, I just made it sound like it is really depressing. It's not. This is very funny. It's very tongue-in-cheek. I so rarely laugh out loud when I read books, but there is a chapter in this about Harry Styles. If you've read the book, you know, that had me cackling. If you are looking for something that's about being lost in your mid-20s, or if you are looking for a light at the end of the tunnel with heartbreak, I would highly, highly, highly recommend Really Good Actually by Monica Heisey. The next book I want to talk about is one that I actually spoke about recently, which is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. But honestly, if I'm being serious, just like anything by Abby Jimenez. To start with, I'm pretty sure I've now read all of her newer books. I haven't read like the earlier ones, but please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But if my memory is correct, all of the main female and male characters in this like series that Abby Jimenez has written, it's like an interconnected romance series. So you don't need to read them in order, but like characters from different books will pop up in different spots, if that makes sense. But all of the characters are all, for the most part, in their early 30s, and they don't necessarily have their lives together, or they do, but then in other parts they're falling apart. And I've found that really comforting as someone who is in their early 30s, to read about characters who don't have it all and aren't these like buff bitch, highfalutin career woman, because that's just not me. And sometimes that can feel really debilitating, to not be at a point in your life and your career when you are in your early 30s that you thought you would be when you were 18. So this particular book, Yours Truly, is about Brianna and Jacob, who are both doctors at a hospital, and they end up they kind of start as work enemy rivals, but it's enemies to lovers, it's fake dating. It's again so laugh out loud funny. But it also touches on some really heavy topics of like family illness and trying to deal with people's expectations. And again, this one also talks about a character getting divorced. But it's just a really like blushing, kicking your feet romance. And I think both of the main characters are very realistic as human beings. But yeah, I think Abby Jimenez puts some like crack cocaine in her books, because the way I just absolutely could not put this down. I loved that the characters sort of start talking to each other through letters rather than like actually face to face. I thought that was a really fun way to like kick off their romance. And it's just fun. It's fun. It has some multicultural characters in it, so I loved the representation. I think it's a really great representation for non-white characters. And it has a lot of humor, it has a lot of heart, it has a lot of everything that you could possibly want in a book if you're trying to get that like feel-good, warm-hearted feeling. The next book I want to talk about is maybe one that when I start talking about it isn't going to sound like it fits into this topic, but you just have to, this is a trust the process kind of thing, and that is Blob by Maggie Sue. Now this is about our main character, Vi, who quite literally discovers a blob outside of a club one night and decides to take it home, and finds out that this blob is actually like you don't really find out what he is, but basically she manages to turn this blob into like the perfect man. So at this point in Vi's life, again, her long-term relationship has just come to an end. She is trying to find her place in the world. She's kind of working a dead-end job that she doesn't like. She feels inferior, she feels left behind, she feels unloved, and I guess a bit like scraggly. And so when she finds this blob and manages to basically grow it into like a Ryan Gosling type man, she thinks like, finally, this is the thing that is gonna bring my life together. This is gonna be the romantic thing I need. This is going to be the man I can take home and impress my parents. Vi quickly discovers that when you don't like yourself in here, no amount of external validation is ever going to necessarily fix that. I think this is a great story about, again, self-discovery, finding an internal power that you didn't know that you had when you feel like you're absolutely on the floor and you have nothing left to give. This is a great book that tells you that you can get up and you can start again, no matter how far you feel like you've fallen behind your classmates or no matter how far you feel like you may have fallen behind compared to, you know, people you went to school with or people you work with. It's never too late to get your life together, and it's never too late to find who you want to be in the world, and it's never too late to pursue a career or an interest or a hobby. This is just a really beautiful, wonderful book about identity, self-identity, cultural identity, sexual identity, all of the above. Basically, finding your place in the world and learning to be okay with it, even if it's not the place you initially thought you might end up. The next one I want to talk about is maybe a bit of a left of field choice, and that is Down the Drain by Julia Fox. I was not expecting, when I picked up Julia Fox's biography, to have it be as good as it was. I had no idea her life was as insane. There's like lots of people talking about how much of it is actually true, but she has had like 17 lives in the space of one life. And I think she's just such a hardworking, fascinating woman. And this is it's written by her, and it has a very light-hearted, casual approach, just like I think Julia Fox is as a person. It's very funny, it's very biting. Again, it's all done with like a big wink and very tongue-in-cheek. But I also think it talks about how, again, you can be at a point in your life where you feel like you have absolutely hit rock bottom, and it's never too late to come back. Julia Fox has worked through addiction, through abusive relationships, through the death of very important people in her life, and she's somehow figured out how to keep calm and carry on and just charge ahead. And she now has a life that she is very proud of. But throughout the book, I think even when she is at her quote lowest moments, she still has a really strong sense of self and a strong sense of self-love, which I think is important, and I think something we can all absolutely learn from. I think Julia Fox is a bit of a real life example of a phoenix rising from the ashes. She's the perfect example of how to just get back up and keep going when you are so tired and you feel so downtrodden and you feel like you've got absolutely nothing left in the tank to give. This is just such a great example of not giving up. Keep pursuing whatever you want in life with your whole chest, and try and find humor and joy and brightness and love in the small pockets of happiness that you're able to find along the way. I also think this is a beautiful story of not taking your friends and family for granted, not assuming that the people you love are always going to be in your life and that you're going to be always lucky enough to have them. Julia Fox has dealt with a lot of tragedy and death in her life, and I think she is a beautiful example of someone who does not take life and her friends and the people that she loves for granted. The byline of the book really sums it up, which is sometimes you just have to say fuck it and throw your life down the drain just to see where you'll come out on the other side. Honestly, that is such a life lesson that anyone at any age can learn, but particularly, as I mentioned, if you are maybe in your late 20s, you're sort of like looking at your life being like, shit, this is not where I thought I'd be. I thought I'd be married with kids and a millionaire, and I'm sitting at home in my undies eating CC chips straight out of the packet. That may or may not be me today. It's just such a brilliant way of summing up that you're never done, no matter what age. Julia Fox is not old by any standards, but I think she's older than a lot of what Hollywood or the music, like the industry, like the Hollywood industry as a whole, she was a lot older than what I think a lot of women are by the time they're sort of chewed up and spat back out and considered like too old to participate in Hollywood. Julia Fox, I think, is a great example of quote making it a bit later in life, and I would just so highly recommend giving this one a read. The next book I want to talk about is Good Material by Dolly Alderton. This is about couple Jen and Andy. There's a lot of breakup stories, but I do think as a plot structure, a breakup at the beginning of a book works really, really well as a tool for the character to have that moment of self-discovery. One of the things I loved the most about this book is the fact that most of the time when we have these sort of breakup stories, like a lot of the ones I've just talked about, the main character is a female. We get her perspective, trying to find her place in the world, etc., etc., like the highs and lows of dating in your late 20s. And yes, I love those stories, and they are my absolute bread and butter. I love reading them. But what I loved about this is that the couple is Jen and Andy, but the main character of this story is actually Andy, and we get the perspective of a breakup and that moment of self-discovery from the perspective of a white man. Never in my life would I say I'd be interested to read the perspective of a white man, but Dolly Alderton could, I'd read her shopping list. I was going to include Everything I Know About Love, which I feel like is a very obvious choice to go on this list. And again, I would absolutely recommend Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. It is her autobiography. I always get those mixed up. It is about being reflecting back on your early, teens to early 20s, as in your late 20s, and reflecting about how the people, particularly your platonic female friendships, have shaped you to be the person that you are. We're talking about this book, which is Good Material. So as I mentioned, this centers around one of the two characters in a breakup, which is Andy. He is wildly in love with Jen and cannot work out why they aren't together anymore, and he's basically trying to work through where the relationship went wrong, what he could have done to treat her differently. What I loved about this book is that Andy is a comedian, and I feel like so often when authors try and portray characters from certain creative aspects, like an actor or a comedian, they do a really fucking terrible job of it. Dolly Alderton has knocked it out of the park. I think I know quite a lot of comedians. I have some comedians as friends, and I feel like Andy is so reminiscent of these people that I know in real life. Just his attitude, the way he talks, his kind of self-deprecating nihilism is just so accurate. And I think so often when you try and write a funny character, it can fall really, really flat and be really, really bad. Dolly Alderton has done the absolute opposite, which is written a character that is so realistic and so funny and so lovable. You are just rooting for Andy by the end of it. And I also think this is a great story, again, of two people that don't necessarily not love each other, but just don't work anymore, and a lesson how sometimes people come into your life at certain times of your life to help you learn certain lessons, and once you have learned those lessons, oftentimes their space in your life is no longer needed. And yes, that's sad and awful, but that's just kind of the reality of life, isn't it? I would also highly recommend Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton, but if you are looking for something that is fiction, that is funny, that is light, this is Good Material by Dolly Alderton. The last book I want to talk about is actually the book that inspired this whole video. I'm sure I've read books that I loved and felt as deeply, but this book in particular I have never wanted a main character to succeed as much as I wanted this character, and that is Elenor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeymoon. I'm sure this is a super, super popular book. I'm sure lots of people have read it. I was very late to the game though. So basically, we follow our main character, Elenor, who is just working an admin office job, and she has her routine. She wakes up, she does the same thing every day. She goes to work, she comes home, she eats the same thing. She doesn't really have a lot of friends. She doesn't have a boyfriend. We meet her when she's just gone to a gig with a co-worker, and she's developed an infatuation with the main singer of the band that she saw, and she's determined to try and turn her life around to be someone worthy of being with this man. What we get instead is just the most wholesome, beautifully written story of friendship and love and self-discovery and recovering from trauma. It's just so good. So as the story unfolds, you realize that Elenor has had a really, really, really tough life. She has a terrible relationship with her mother, who is obviously a terrible person and has done terrible things that you slowly uncover as the book unfolds. Watching Elenor slowly but surely realize that not only is she worthy of love, but she deserves it, and it should be a right in your life to have people who love you and who will fiercely show up for you. I hate books that kind of, I mean, they all do it. It's like, what is it called? The third act conflict or whatever, but like books where it does that and then it's like that. This just, Elenor, you just slowly do that, and every time I'm like, oh no, don't do that, don't go that direction, she doesn't, and you just get to watch her improve little bit by little bit and develop these beautiful friendships with just the funniest characters. All of the characters in here are just so beautifully written and wonderfully realistic. I could rave about this book for days and days and days, but if you want something that will like reignite your love of life and reaffirm to you that there are good fucking people in the world, Elenor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeymoon will absolutely do that for you. I cannot recommend this book enough. As I mentioned at the start, I read a lot of depressing books. It is like probably 9 books out of 10 will be kind of sad and depressing or just straight up like weird. This is just, oh, I love this book so much. I wish this goes into one of the books that I wish I could scrub from my memory and like reread again for the first time, because it was just so touching and heartwarming and poignant, and oh, I could go on and on and on. Please read this book if you haven't already. So those are my 6 top choices for books that I would recommend if you're in a bit of a slump, if you're feeling like a bit down, if you're feeling a bit low, if you're feeling a bit lost in your late 20s, early 30s, and you're looking to find a character that you can relate to and kind of re-find that zest and spark and verve for life, I would highly recommend any of the 6 books I just talked about. I'm in need of a little pick-me-up. So if you have any recommendations for me that you think are like gentle, heartwarming, doesn't necessarily have to be romance, but I feel like romance always kind of like hits that little spot. If you have any recommendations for me, please drop them in the comments. I hope you're all having a great week. The next 6-month experiment chapter will be released in a couple of days. There's been a lot going on. There's been a lot going on in the background, guys. Holy shit. I will catch you up on all my life admin in that next episode. But for now, I hope you guys have a great week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, don't leave a mean comment or I will cry. And I will see you in my next video. Mwah! Bye!